So I've been in front end land myself, starting to mess around, build a couple of example transactions. And so as always, happy to hack around with that stuff together. But also, as always, love to start with whatever questions everyone here has. Hey, Dom. Hey, Nelson. Welcome, guys. Hey, morning, Curtis.
James.
So yeah, as always, I would love to start first and foremost with whatever questions everyone here has. I know that there have been a variety of background knowledge modules coming out, whether that's exposing you to minting or front ends or transaction metadata, and eventually standards, as you've started to see in module 204. Also know that there's been some great experiments, people getting together and starting to form study groups. Lucas, thanks for your leadership in that. So given the different pathways that people are on right now, what's on your mind? What kind of technical questions do you have about anything that you've seen in the last week or two?
I've been sort of wondering, so the metadata is stored in something like Cardano DB sync, right? It's not stored on the blockchain itself.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? I don't feel confident talking about it. Some people would say that is the blockchain, and others wouldn't. And there's this distinction between the actual settlement layer, right? That information that you can see in the current state of UTXOs. In my mind, when I think about the blockchain, that's what I think of. And then I think about DB Sync as, the history of the blockchain, but it really is a semantic question. So I don't know. Does anybody else have, like, Chanti, how do you talk about DB Sync?
Actually, you realize about the DB sync when you want to run a local instance of the PAB. And I would say it's itself like some sort of database. So it could be, is it like a copy, more than a copy of the blockchain? It's like myself to have seen it's like basically an additional database, which I think with the validators, we haven't looked into what stake pools actually hold in terms of data, but possibly the DB sync should be one of the data set held by stake pool to validate transactions. But I'm not sure as well.
Yeah, Dom, I would love to hear what you think about this.
I just wanted to clarify, like, are you saying that the DB sync genuinely has data that you cannot find on the chain? I get that it's reformatted. If you wanted to like do a normal query, like find all UTXOs at address, you have to read through all the blocks. That's very time consuming and resource intensive. So you flatten that all out, you make a big database with tables and it's really quick to query. But regarding things like metadata, they genuinely don't exist on the blockchain? That's the question.
No, actually, you know what? You just taught me something there. You're right. I mean, so in the history, I can read back through the blocks and I can see the transactions in those blocks if I know how to dip into my DB. And so can I, if I know what I'm doing, the question is, can I read metadata from the DB that is synced up when I simply run Cardano node? I'm actually not sure. Not sure.
Because I heard someone saying this previously, and like they were just talking casually. And they
Yeah.
made it sound like there was genuinely data in DB-Sync that was not on chain, rather than it just be reformatted and made readable. But I find that very hard to believe. So that's the question.
Right. Does it,
I-
Roberto? Yeah.
I thought I sort of understood it that way. Even when you look at transaction flow diagrams, DB Sync looks like an intermediary between the DApp and the ledger, right? And it's just kind of running interference. And when you ask for data, it stops at DB Sync, and all that happens is it's just ask the ledger, is this correct? But it never really, I don't know. That's kind of where there's like when I looked at the simple diagram, I think it's in like escrow contract. It just skips it. It goes onto your DB Sync, and then it just goes all the way to the ledger, and the ledger just does the validation. But I'm not sure what happens in the middle space in between.
So, oh yeah, Dom, go.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll say anything helpful in response to that, but like if you were trying to build a website that was displaying data about the chain, like what transaction history a certain contract, I use that word, has been through, if you were backing that with the blockchain, that would be very expensive to actually pull the data out each time a user wanted that. So you'd want to use something like Postgres-backed DB-Sync style database, which is, as far as I know, what it has. It has all of the history of the ledger in tabular form rather than blockchain form. So that's why it exists. If you actually need to submit something to the blockchain, yeah, you still have to go to the node.
Right. And so all of that data that the node is syncing, it could be processed another way. Is if right, if what Dom is having us question is true, right? Like that would be the idea. All of this information is encoded on the ledger itself. It's just hard to access it. And so what does DB Sync do? It repackages that data in one way that makes it more accessible and more efficient to access. But that could be done other ways. And I want to confirm that Roberto will know that. Roberto Morano will know that. We can ask him. And that makes a lot of sense. You see, I think I've been kind of making this assumption because it's kind of like a rule of thumb, but it does ignore the fact that the data is there in some format. And so we need to confirm that. But the reason I've been ignoring it is that the DB Sync database is just so much bigger than the ledger itself.
Yeah, it's quite larger.
By order of magnitude bigger. Nelson, what do you think?
Yeah, I just opened the GitHub page of Cardano DB Sync, and it's written there that it follows the Cardano chain and take information from the chain and internally maintain copy of ledger state. So I guess what Dom is saying is true. Like,
yeah,
data is extracted from the chain and inserted. Like, so it doesn't say anything about just keeping a copy to itself. Like, it's taking data from the chain and using it. I think that's what it says in the GitHub page.
yeah. No, that makes sense. I think part of my misunderstanding had to do with an outdated mental model as well. If you have a checkbook and you're writing checks, you keep memos that your bank never sees, right? Like I might write a check to my brother and write down what it was for. He goes and cashes that. Only I have that memo in my private little notebook there. And the bank never sees that. But if I ever go look at my ledger, I have that record of why I sent that thing there. And that's not this, right? And so there's not that separate ledger that is invisible to the settlement layer. It's more that it's just parsed in a better way. Dom. I don't know if you're talking, but you're muted still. Hey, Krish.
Sorry. Yes, I was saying very interesting things. Yes. And then I lost my train of thought. This is somewhat confused by the fact that wallets invite you to add metadata during a transaction. And it says in some versions of wallets, like add metadata, which is completely separate, which is kind of as you're describing, right? You've got a wallet and you can say why you paid someone, but that doesn't access a chain. And in fact, if you reinstalled your wallet, that data would all be lost. Or if you opened up your wallet somewhere else, it's not on chain, but they still call it metadata.
Yeah. So the language, I mean, I guess the biggest lesson for me is, right, all the language we use to describe these things, it's loaded, right? And it comes with its own connotations from structures as they have existed. And it's good to pay attention. And I take full responsibility. I definitely have been kind of saying it this way, like, hey, you've got the settlement layer here, and you've got DB Sync, which is providing for you information. But the thing I got to stop saying is that you can't get that information anywhere else, because that's not true. There are alternatives possible to DB Sync. And so we should be more straightforward about, hey, DB Sync is one implementation of a tool that reads from the Cardano ledger. And Nelson, like you read directly from the docs, right? It populates these tables that are then made accessible to us. Worth it. Thanks, guys. Roberto, yeah.
But so the metadata that we add to transactions, that is not stored on the blockchain, right?
Okay, so now back to our original question. If the understanding that we're coming to in this conversation is true, the answer is, well, actually, yes, the metadata is stored on the blockchain. It's just that it's computationally hard to access it. And it's easier to access that metadata from a tool like DB Sync, which repackages that data, right? Puts it into a table that makes it easier for us to query against.
Okay, the information that gets stored on the ledger is hashed into CBOR code, right? So does that mean that this metadata is included in that hash that is sent into the blockchain? Does that make the hash, like, that would make the hash, okay, so that would make, yeah, the more data you add to the metadata, the bigger your hash is, the more expensive it is. Okay.
Yeah. And I want to doubly confirm that. I want to be 100% certain that that's true. And Uli, thanks for this. Yeah, retrieving.
Yeah, you hear it. There are many ways to retrieve metadata stored in the Cardano blockchain. So it looks like it is stored on the blockchain. No. I don't know.
Right, they're using the language that it's stored in the blockchain. Retrieve the metadata stored in. And so I think it sounds like the hypothesis coming out of this conversation is true, right? That metadata is encoded somewhere on the ledger itself, right? In the block that that transaction was included in. It is retrievable. DB Sync makes it even more retrievable. And then Uli's link is interesting because a service like Blockfrost then abstracts even the direct interaction with DB Sync into an even more accessible endpoint. Dom, what do you say?
I don't know if you want to just, have you guys read the Cddl files? They specify exactly what the data formats are. So there's no basically no ambiguity left if you work your way through what's written in the Cddl files. And if someone who's not on a mobile phone could direct us to the Cardano ledger Cddl files, that's probably better. Sorry, does anyone know what the Cddl files are?
I just put a link in the chat to one example of that.
Thank you.
That says Alonzo era. Let's see. It's Babbage. It's the upcoming Babbage era version. Yeah. Good. And so, and what you can see in the Cddl file, right? So here's all of it, the script, any stake pool interactions. That's another thing that you will often refer to DB-Sync for. So a lot of staking information happens here. I'm looking for just like I think metadata is just at the top where it says auxiliary data set. Just be sharing my screen too. Block consists of what?
So what is a Cddl file?
Yeah, what does that stand for?
Concise data dictionary language or something like that. It's a very terse way of communicating data structures. So there's a spec for it, and RTF somewhere.
So what's a transaction? It has a body, a witness set. I'm assuming the Boolean would be about whether it was accepted or not. And then optionally auxiliary data.
So on line 330, there's something about metadata.
Yeah. And
Here's transaction metadata here. Yeah. Oh, down.
oh, sorry, I was just looking for where it
Oh.
references auxiliary data again for the first time. Redeemer. But in any case, yeah. Oh, it's below that.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm.
Metadata. Here's the label. Here's our key. And then what does the auxiliary data consist of? Could be metadata. It could be additional scripts. Good. All right. So any objections to feeling confident that that all of the data is indeed on chain? So DB-Sync does not hold information that the chain does not hold, but it repackages that information in a way that's more accessible to us. If that's our working understanding for now, can everybody just be on the lookout to take it that way until you discover otherwise? Concise data definition.
Yep.
That was worth it. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Okay, so I can add metadata to a transaction at the lowest level. Yeah, reviewing these Cddl files. That's a good recommendation, Dom. Thanks. And then for the, you know, for the higher level developer to consume that data, then of course it's good to have an understanding of what this is here. But at the end of the day, what we're most interested in is being able to consume that metadata and do something with it. Staying on metadata for a minute, if people have had a chance to start looking into those metadata exercises, do you have any questions? Whether you've moved through that already or if you're just getting started? So just to bring everybody into this, I know that some people have completed the latest assignment from module 203 that went live on Friday. And if you haven't done it yet, here's a little preview. This is the current version of the course template. And here at the top of the page, there's a series of links from just checking your connection to checking for a token to viewing a list of everyone who holds the PPBL Summer 2022 token to number 4, this hello metadata. And so I've got this running locally, right? This project is not deployed live anywhere, but is available for anybody to grab it. And what's cool about this is that we can look at the code for this metadata example in the React project, but it's always going to update dynamically by looking at what is on the testnet chain. So Uli, most recent, nice. Thank you. Greetings back. Okay, so what you're seeing here is anybody who successfully posts metadata in a transaction with this particular key, that metadata is going to show up here in the front end template. We've got Roberto, Sam. This was Dagwell. I figured that out. Nelson. Okay, so thanks to everybody who tried this assignment so far. But what questions does this raise for you? Any how do you do that or what if style questions here?
You know, I'll tell you a little kind of mini game that I was playing yesterday to try to beat this assignment. I had exec'd into my container and I was attempting to make a simple metadata just with script, you know, just kind of bash it out and just pipe that to a file and then use that file to submit the metadata so I wouldn't have to leave the container. A little choppy, actually. I ended up having to Docker copy a pre-made metadata file that I had over into my container. So I might play around with it later. It would be kind of cool if I didn't have to rely, like if I was stranded on a container island and I didn't have anything to help me out and I could just script my metadata straight from on the bash script. I think that would be a nifty skill to have.
I think that's a whole lot more than just nifty. That's a high utility skill, right? Can anybody here think of why you'd want to automate the inclusion of metadata on transactions?
Because that could be used for tracking, right? That could be used like if you want to give a receipt or something, that should be automated, right?
That's what I'm thinking.
I know that MinSwap uses they use different metadata keys. When I'm lurking through the metadata, I'll see like so many things for swaps. Especially with like LP and things like that. So, you'll sell an asset and then they'll mark it in the transaction like the LP that they assign to that wallet. So I've seen that used a lot in metadata.
So metadata is just pretty much like contractual information for the transaction, extra contractual information for the.
It's extra arbitrary information that can be used however you'd like, right? So some people might use it, yeah, to record just a critical handful of details about a contract that might be happening, right? Or what is the data point or two that you might want to include in a receipt for some transaction. But it's the sky's the limit, right? So you've got all these keys and people can claim them and just start using them, right? We happen to be using this one, but we have no claim to this as real estate, right? Nobody owns it. It's just an arbitrary reference that allows us to kind of filter results and see what's there. And then the structure of the information inside of that metadata, we can make it do whatever we need it to do.
Would there be any way to insert malicious code through metadata?
That's a really good question. So let's put that one to the group. What does anything come to mind when you think about opportunities to submit malicious code here? How could you, what's the process by which you could see that going down?
You'd have to have like a point. The way I see it, whatever you put on chain, if you were writing like an auxiliary program whose job was to read metadata on the chain, for instance, if it was like, to build a level of a game or something, where it acts as metadata, and you would have to, I feel like you'd have to have something on the metadata that would be malicious to whatever's reading. But it would have to get through the transmission submission. It's very interesting. I think about this a lot because you got the transparency of the open chain. So it would have to be something that everyone could see, but it would have to be arranged in some way that would be harmful.
Dom, yeah.
Yeah, it would have to be executed. So either the chain was actually badly written, which is possible but unlikely, and then the nodes actually tried to execute something like you put some kind of escape character, if one existed, in your auxiliary data, and then it started executing something else. Or there's some other program somewhere like some DApp that they attempts to try and execute on-chain data that it reads, in which case, yeah, anything could happen.
Quick reference to XKCD because we all know this is the best way to learn things. Yeah. Exactly. Well, this exactly. Good job. Yeah, my instinct is the same as what Dagwell and Dom are saying. And let me just switch screen shares here over to look at. So we were just looking at, hey, how on the browser, we can just grab all of the metadata that has been sent to this particular key and we can render it there. So if I look here's that page, right? Here's the metadata example page that was just on my screen a moment ago. And all of the heavy lifting is being done by this metadata example query that's in the components folder. So I can open up that. And then what's here, and again, everybody here also, you have this. If you have the front end template on your device, you can review this code as well. But we're just saying, yeah, look, query, use a GraphQL query. And we'll talk more about these. Look at all the transactions where the metadata has some particular key, right? And then give us back, here's the most important part, here's the metadata itself, the key and value pairs in the metadata. And so if somebody put in that value, which is being rendered here, could you sneak some malicious code into that value that would then break a web app? Maybe, right? If you studied the way that people were consuming that data, like here's just that very rudimentary example of what Dagwell was talking about. But yeah, this project, it does start to consume that data. It doesn't run any logic on it yet. It's just printing it to the page. But this would maybe be even more vulnerable if we were trying to run, some computations based on whatever that value was. What do you think?
I really don't know about this, but would there be any way to insert some sort of attribute to the text component that would have an effect on the key property?
Well, we're querying for a key in the first place, right? So it's only going to pull the transactions with metadata matching this key in the first place. Could you manipulate that key by and right, you can't, going back to those Cddl specs, right? It's specified what this key has to be. It can be a number in a range that's provided in the Cddl. Could you do something with the value that would then manipulate that key? I'm not sure. As we start to think about metadata, does anybody else have any other questions about that?
Hey, James, I'm seeing a lot of the like, for instance, Hazelnet, it's able to pick up traits now. But usually we're scanning on 721. Do you think that we're going to start seeing more DApps that kind of make the metadata more visible? Because right now, for instance, full PM, pretty much just reads, display 721. I'm wondering if we're going to bring some more keys out into the fold to make them more readily available. I know they're available, but people can know about them and start making them active.
I'm most interested in putting that question to everybody else as well. So first of all, does anybody have any clarifying questions about what Dagwell is saying right now? Does his question make sense to everybody? And if so, what do you think? This is critical.
So, Dagwell, to ask a clarifying question myself, are you asking, will there be future standards that these platforms will adhere to and accept? or are you asking, can these platforms support custom metadata structures?
All right, that's an excellent clarifying question. So I think that's a two-prong. It's weird because as I was asking that question, another question came up in my mind. Is it up to Pool PM to decide that, hey, we need to add another standard for people to make available to start posting metadata? Or is kind of how I was phrasing the question, and I'm not saying that's what you were saying, is that developers, us, like the reason why, they're pushing, like the reason why we're all on 721 is because everyone, kind of took it from Ethereum, but everyone wanted to have a place to display. We had to. So I think it might be maybe a push from the developers, from us, like when we start maybe demanding it or creating more DApps that use specific keys beyond 721 and 674 and 777 for the royalty. So I guess, yeah, maybe more CIPs, but just because we can already use metadata and the keys, but we're just not really using them.
Yeah, so my understanding is, right, you have a database and a structure of data inside an object, and you need to retrieve information about that object so you can display it to the requester. If the database, or sorry, if the platform, the interface, doesn't know how to structure that data or read through the structure of the data, then it may not appropriately display that information. So it has to adhere to some form of a standard. And I think you're right in that it is up to the community to determine what those standards, are. And then the platforms like Pool PM and Hazelnet Bot will have to adopt it. Otherwise, they may get left behind for other platforms that do support that standard, right? So I think it is very heavily community driven. But could you just customize your own metadata structure, and could those platforms properly present that information? I don't see that being possible, but lack of information on my behalf.
Well, I was thinking okay, so in order for you to submit the metadata on like however you submit it, it has to be within the standard JSON format, which like characters, spaces, whatnot. You can use an unspecified metadata format, but in general, it has to pass. So we're just reading JSON, so like it's just like a choice. So I could have something that says, hey, it's this title pointing to this CID on on IPFS, and I can have that in whatever key I want. And it's still going to be the same information. It's just, we choose to read it off 721. So it'd just be, we could have a whole ID channel where like, you read 721, and if there's any information on, ID channel number, it could pull the information from there, and you could have like a credential. Like, I don't know. I just think that we're kind of cutting ourselves off with only 721.
And I agree. It sounds like you're saying, though, that the key names, right, would be unique and custom, which it can handle, but the structure, like where are those key names located? And I'm sorry, I see Don's hand is up.
Yeah, I had a very elementary question, which was kind of implicitly answered in your explanations, because I know of 721, and I kind of pride myself in ignorance. I don't really know what it means. Are we talking about the metadata standard for NFTs?
That's right. When people talk 721, that's usually what they're referencing.
In Cardano, does that mean that there is a somehow CBOR encoded JSON as auxiliary data on the mint of that policy? That's quite a precise. I was trying to make that quite a precise question. I don't even know if it's even sensible.
You're saying it right. You're saying
okay. But that's what we're talking about here. The data of the minting transaction of an NFT series.
Right.
this is a complete aside, but I just thought it's interesting it's happening. And sorry for taking us off topic, but there is a discussion on the GitHub about because it's not a JSON in these blocks, right? It's encoded in a way, and there's, I don't know, some of us probably have a painful history of trying to deserialize and reserialize CBOR. There is no standard for that, so you can encode an integer in multiple ways. An integer is almost just an integer in JSON, and this has been a pain point. So yeah, it might be encoded in it, like the data structure of the underlying JSON in the metadata might be 721, but that's still not one thing, because there is no standard for like encoding an int, say, an aside.
No, yeah, that's
happening right now.
Yeah, that problem is front and center when you're interacting with contracts, and especially datum, right? Plutus contract datum, not encoded the same way, depending on which libraries you're using. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about that level when we're talking about transaction metadata, because it is consistently serialized for inclusion in blocks, as we were kind of just looking at, and then that decoding step to actually read what is in effect JSON, right? So it's, yes, a lot of that is abstracted away, but that's taken care of at a protocol level in a way that serializing contract addresses or contract datum is not. But that there's already strides being made by a couple of teams on building consistency there. Uli, I saw you unmute a couple times there. What did you have?
No, I just thinking about, I was wondering if it's possible to, for example, when I own an NFT and I can see the structure of the metadata in the pool PM or somewhere else, is it possible to manipulate the rarity of this NFT, for example, or one value of this NFT when I take the transaction, send it to myself with the changed metadata, maybe?
Excellent question. Okay, so I want to come back to Dagwell's point about what's the possibility of metadata, but pinning that for just a moment to answer Uli's question first. If you have an NFT, all of that visual data you see on Pool PM or any other site, or even in wallets like Nami and Eternal that will render your NFTs for you, right? All of that kind of human readable information about your NFT is in metadata, where the key is not this one right here, but 721. Okay, so when people talk about 721, we're talking about using 721 as the metadata key. And just like I can run this query with the number 1618033 right here, and I get a pretty limited set of results because not many people have used this. If I ran the same query for 721, oh my gosh, that what that would return is every NFT that's ever been minted there, okay, with any standardized Cardano NFT metadata. Now, the short answer, Uli, to your question is no. Okay, you won't be able to change the metadata associated with your NFT, because in order to change that metadata, you must run another minting transaction, not just any sending transaction of that token, but a minting transaction of that token. Okay, so if I mint 10,000 NFTs and I want them to evolve sometime later, at that later point, I'm going to have to use the same minting credentials I used the first time, right? If it was single signature or a multi-sig minting policy, I have to meet those qualifications again. And then I either have to mint one more token or burn one more token, whatever it is. And if I do, okay, now that metadata is going to take precedence in the standard. And let me change over to CIP 25, just so we have it in front of us. You'll see in the metadata standard, towards the bottom, there's this bit about versioning. Okay, so if you want to change the metadata associated with an NFT, you also have to include this optional version field, and the number here has to be higher than any version that's been used before, right? You don't have to use that on initial mint. It's optional. Okay, so we can only change the metadata with a minting transaction. You can only complete a minting transaction if you can, if you're the policy holder, if you have the signing keys associated with the minting policy, and if there was any date in your minting policy, which for anybody here who's gone a bit deeper into native scripts, you know that signatures are just one of a few different fields you could include in a policy. But if there's some, now I'm forgetting the name of it. I don't think we're going to see it in this file. Yeah. But in the native scripts, right, you can include the before, valid after, and then some slot. And if your minting policy is only valid before a certain slot and that slot has passed, well, there can never be a minting transaction again. And therefore that metadata can't ever be changed in relation to those tokens. Hopefully that made some sense, but let me know if there's other questions there. Yeah, Curtis.
So for an NFT project that plans on having an evolutionary NFT, they would create a minting policy that may never expire, right? I mean, that sounds like the logic that would go through their minds is, okay, we want to evolve this NFT. We've already roadmapped out, say, 2 evolutions. We don't know if there's going to be future evolutions. So they would create a minting policy that essentially never expires. And then does that compromise the trust with that NFT project? Meaning they could technically mint as many as they want, right? If that time slot is set to forever in the future, doesn't that mean they could mint another 10,000 at their whim if they want to? And what does that impact to the community?
Who wants to take Curtis's question there?
May I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead first.
Oh, well, you were definitely first, right? You go ahead. I'll sit in the back.
No, I was just about to say, so an NFT is unique because it consumes a UTXO when it's minted. So technically, it doesn't actually rely on the deadline or, yeah, the minting deadline at all. So that actually makes me confused. Like, how can it be evolutionary in the first place? But Yeah, maybe if somebody else has any
the UTXO becomes a part. It's the slot time. It becomes embedded in the policy. So you have to have the policy when to submit the transaction, and part of the policy, one of the conditions in order for it to be validated will be if it is in or past the slot time that it's been allotted. So if you're past that slot time, or if you create it like a kind of like a container of time where you have to like an escrow, you have to be in between. You either have to be in that field or not outside of that field, or it won't validate. So it won't allow you to submit the transaction. So it is very crucial to once you get that policy created, how you create the policy, the script, it will tell you what the policy needs in order to submit. And part of that is slot time.
Got it.
Sam and then Dom.
Well, but you're asking about leaving the policy open forever. So is that not possible? Because you have to put a deadline on the slot?
No,
Sorry, go ahead, James, my fault.
Oh, that wasn't me. Was that Dagwell and Curtis?
Dagwell, you're muted, I think.
I didn't want to
short
short everybody.
Yeah, my fault. Go ahead, Dagwell.
Oh, I was just going to say, we have the opportunity to work with some projects, and whenever we work with people and we're going to mint stuff, so usually what we'll do is I'll create like a prototype policy, where I will have it completely open. And I will go ahead and we'll go back and forth on ideas, and I'll change that metadata. I'll mint, a whole bunch of new ones, and it'll change the policy on all of them. And then eventually we'll get to something that the client wants, and I will set that metadata for 1 week, and you do it by seconds, so I'll do it for a week, and then what I'll do from there is that way me and the client, we have that relationship, and no funny business. I mean, sometimes even a day, it all depends, but I'm really, really adamant about having an exact policy lock to kind of avoid what Curtis was asking about earlier with like being able to like, recreate the whole project under the same policy.
So yeah, you can set you can basically run it out forever if you choose to. But that's where I'm kind of confused in the evolutionary situation. You can't do that unless you set that policy date out to a much, much farther future, right? Like if you don't know how many evolutions you're going to allow the community to do, then you almost have to leave that open. And does that lose trust? Or are we integrating trust in the situation where it was trustless because of the policy ID, but now because the policy ID is sort of vague, you're introducing a requirement for trust? And what kind of impact does that have? Or what are the implications?
On that last mint before that series is over, and I'm just throwing ideas out here. Something that I was toying with is on the last line, when you change it for that final metadata, put the newly created policy in that metadata to kind of ease transition over to a new policy. So that way, that's one avenue that you could possibly take to kind of ensure like a smooth transition. But to your point, I get like with the iterations, maybe we could set up a process that, if you know you're going to do something that has continual updates, maybe that'd be an interesting thing where you could like, I don't know, it'd be interesting.
Well, so then I was going to ask about, so there's CIP 68. I've read over it a bit, but maybe if you could explain how that's different in layman's terms.
Can I come in a little bit before that?
Yeah.
Cheers. Just going right back to something that Uli said earlier about the metadata and whether you can change it in transactions. In the setup that we're discussing, I mean, this was explained by James, but just to be clear, like the ledger is immutable. And if the standard specifies that the data that these projects and we decide is the source of truth, is the transaction or the mint of these things, then obviously once it's done, it can never be changed. If there's other kind of projects which say that the user is responsible for their data, that you could create a standard where everything's up to the user and you shove that data into the datum. So that would then be possible. On the, I don't know whose question this is about, the whether you can have like the implications of evolutionary NFTs. I think we're talking about two separate ways of building NFTs, which I guess is in the modules, right? It's like the native script that predates Plutus. And so all that was available to have a limitation on the future minting possibility of a native script is by putting a deadline. But if you just looked at that, you couldn't really tell how many things were minted by it. You would have to scan the whole chain, work out, like, I've counted them all, I've exhaustively counted them, and I can see the script and it says no more could be minted after this date, and that date has passed. So therefore there can be no more. Nowadays, we've got Plutus and we can do almost arbitrary logic. So if you wanted 4 generations, so sorry, the modern way of making NFTs is to, as was said, like to specify in the validator that a transaction output, a UTXO previously made, is spent in this transaction. And if you specify entirely, you can say there'll be no more. You could specify it partially. So you could have a previous transaction which makes 4 outputs. They'll each have the same ID, but they'll have different index. So therefore you could write a validator in which you say must have this ID, but don't specify the index. And therefore you'd have like the possibility that this mint could happen at no more than 4 times. So like socially, do people trust it? Like different question. But you could also like limit, you can only mint 1,000 things each time. And therefore like ultimately there couldn't be more than 4,000 things with this policy ID. I'm going to jump calls, but thanks everyone.
Man, that was fun. And we'll talk soon. But guys, okay, so this is I want to go back to Dagwell's original question, like what else can we do with that metadata? But Sam, yeah, let's go back to you first.
I was just gonna say I found the link. I put it in the chat for CIP 68 that makes it where you can read about it.
Okay, good. That's easier to read. And let's read through this together in just a minute. But let's go back to this broader question about metadata. And then also, you know, Dom a moment ago mentioned kind of the social aspect, and Curtis mentioned this question about trust. And frankly, what I hope for everybody here, and I've seen this among people over and over again for the last 2 years, the more you understand what a Cardano NFT actually is, the more ridiculous it starts to feel. Truly, right? Like this is the only reason this entire ecosystem exists is because of the social aspect of people just agreeing, yeah, if you put metadata on minting transactions this way, then a bunch of people are going to build websites that read that metadata a certain way. And you're going to have this whole, I mean, how valuable has this ecosystem been in terms of the amount of financial value exchanged for these things? But frankly, I see it as just a big house of cards. It's this simple use of primitive tools, and it's just one way of using these tools. But that's why, to me, it's not necessarily a bad thing that the entire ecosystem is built on such kind of, simple agreements, because it points to the fact that, Dagwell, my answer to your original question that got us going here is a resounding, hell yeah, we've got to. The resounding fact is we now have in our hands tools that make it trivial to propose new standards, okay? We can define whatever we want, and we can place it on this public ledger, and then we can consume it however we'd like. And if other people want to join us in consuming that data, we can just say, hey, yeah, this is the metadata key you need to know. And here's the format of that data that we're posting. You want to consume it too? You got it. Open access. And so introduced in module 203 at the end of last week, and this is what we're going to be working on together between now and the end of the course, is we are going to initiate a new standard. Everybody who finishes this course is going to get a credential token saying that they did. Should that credential token have 721 data on it? I don't know. Do you want to be able to look at it on Pool PM? If so, then it should probably have 721 data on it. Should it have only 721 data, or should we choose another key and fill it in with whatever fields we deem necessary, so that whatever front ends we choose to build can consume that data and present it? Look, here's a really basic version of what I'm saying right now. This is a website right here that will put your message on the screen if it has this metadata key. It would be trivial to change this code so that it's not just JSON stringifying all of this data right here, but it was only pulling the value part, right? And then everybody who posted here, we could see their, a beautifully printed little message, right? This is that no attention to design is going into the way this page is being presented here. This is just showing you the fact of how trivial it is to consume metadata and present it on a page, right? But you can choose whatever key you want. You can structure your data however you want. And then you can build a front end that consumes that data and makes it look really interesting. So I hope the message is coming through loud and clear. Dagwell, not only is it possible to grab other metadata keys and start inventing new use cases and standards, I believe it's essential that we start playing with that. And everybody here, don't let the NFT ecosystem shield you from the simple fact that we now have these primitive tools that are even better than we might realize, right? This fact that we have this open ledger to record shareable data in any way you want. We're only limited by our imaginations right now. But what do you think? Does that make some sense, or does that raise new questions for anybody here?
We've been playing around with even on the 721 layer, I did some prototypes where we'll have key to other metadata layer. If you want to validate that transaction, you go to this key and you can see, what we did on that 721 key. Man, I'm so excited you could make a whole universe, a whole game engine or whatnot. And it does, if other people run on that, that's fine. But you're gonna have other instances on that key. And it's really awesome in my opinion, because I start thinking of save cards, I start thinking of levels, I start thinking of like you got to have this metadata key. You can earn that eventually. Now it's on your PFP, and then you can query and you have that key in your metadata. It's a whole new world. It's really exciting in my opinion. It's really starting to finally tap in to people always ask, what can you do with blockchain? What can you do with it? Well, let's show you, man. And it's really exciting.
And like Dom is saying right here, like we're not limited to just using one key in any given transaction, right? So here's an example of a single transaction that actually has 2 metadata keys specified in it. You could use as many as you need to. So for example, a credential token could have a 721 that just shows an image and a URL, right? Or an image and a quick message, what this thing is. But then it could have another key that actually holds, you know, the actual credential information, whatever that turns out to be, okay? And think about it. We build that, we use it for ourselves, right? We represent it here. On gimballabs.com, instead of having a page that just maps over all of the transactions that have this key and trivially shows you the message, we can have a page that just shows, here are all the existing credentials that were minted for PPBL summer 2022. And then those tokens will be out there in the world. But let's go back here. This, right? And here, I'm not logged in right now. If I connect my wallet, I can then see whether or not I have this token. Okay, I do. But keep in mind, this is just some arbitrary token with a policy ID that I minted a couple of weeks ago. What's your favorite NFT? You can go into the code base for this template and you can replace the policy ID for PPBL summer 2022 with the policy ID for any NFT, whether you minted it or not. It doesn't matter where it came from. You can build a front end that presents privileged information to somebody who holds any token. And that's an independent variable from what metadata is on that token. These are 2 separate concerns. Used in tandem, they yield some pretty exciting opportunities. And I think we still have a lot to discover about what those opportunities are. That's why I'm here right now. I want to discover that stuff with other people, right? But you've got this ability to say, okay, first of all, do you have the token? Just by checking the policy ID and the token name. And then second of all, what metadata was associated with the minting of that token? Start thinking about the different creative ways you could combine those things. And then start thinking about, okay, well, if a Gimbal Labs website shows a list of people who completed a course, would anybody else want to use those credentials tokens? Maybe you get privileged access to some other tool that somebody else is building. Maybe somebody starts to piggyback on the prototype of a standard that we developed together right here. Maybe somebody finds a better way to consume the results of the metadata that we create together to represent a credential token. There's so many places that this work might take us next. And yeah, I mean, to me, that's what it's all about. Now we've got these tools. Why not do the social part? Why not start working together to think about how we might want to use them and see what happens? I'm catching up with the chat here too.
Yeah, so it's just I was watching one of the Plutus Pioneer Programs video, and then Lars basically suggested that we should consume the UTXO whenever we want to mint an NFT because the UTXO is unique. But I don't understand the implications of what if you decide to just use a time lock, because he said in the video, if you use a time lock, you have to check the blockchain explorer if you've already minted that NFT. But that's what was used in the Mary era, that kind of mechanism. So that's why I'm kind of confused. Like, could there be like, could that not guarantee that the tokens are minted more than once? But yeah.
Good. Good. Okay. So time is kind of the brute force way to ensure that something can't happen again after a certain time, right? So we know we've got this ability to make a policy, whether it's a native script policy or a minting validator that you write in Plutus. In each of those, you have the ability to specify time, right? And you could say, after this time, this token can never be minted again, right? And after that deadline, anybody who wants to can look at the list of tokens with that policy ID, and they can confirm or disconfirm that there is indeed one of each token as was promised, right? So that's one thing. What you just said as well points to another capability, which is using Plutus to confirm that only one of something is being minted, right? Irrespective of time, we can also write a minting policy that says, hey, you can only mint one token at a time. That's trivial, and Plutus can just do that anytime. You can only mint one at a time, or 10 at a time, or 123 at a time, whatever number you want to put in your contract code. The more interesting thing that you said takes that a step further and says, well, can we use Plutus just to check if this particular token has been minted before? And this is where we would need to look at, we would have to either be using the PAB or be using our own version of a PAB that is looking at the history of the chain and saying, okay, at this policy ID, has this token name been minted before? If so, you're not allowed to mint that name again. But if not, okay, you can mint that. Okay. And so to me, that's a really interesting outcome. And I haven't personally had time to implement it yet. So that might be something worth looking at together. But if you think about it, right, you derive a policy ID from a Plutus minting validator. And then every time you want to use that validator, there's going to be a check performed. Yeah, I haven't quite put the pieces together in my head about if we can, how reliably we can use Plutus to confirm that a token name is being minted for the first time. But I think that's a really interesting exploration. And I also echo Dagwell's advice here, like just to see a policy in action. You can try minting something on like Cardano CLI, for example, where you use a policy that hasn't yet expired, and then you try to use it again after it has expired and see what happens. But that's a different concern than using Plutus to guard for names.
Yeah, I gotta look into this further. But the time lock, I completely understand how it works. I'm just thinking whether it's actually the UTXO that's preventing it from being minted twice, or it's actually the time lock, or it's maybe both. So yeah, I need to do some experimenting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would love to see, just drop a line as to what you discover. And I need to review that video again because I'm not sure what role the UTXO is playing. The UTXO itself.
Well, that's talking about if you're making an NFT, and in order to make sure that it's a single, never been reproduced NFT, then they lock it by the UTXO that's used to create it. But as far as making another of that NFT, especially, you could just use the next UTXO in the wallet, and whatever UTXO is used to mint that next one, then that'll be the UTXO that's locked with that next one. And then go like that. I think he's talking about, they use the UTXO because they're all individual to Cardano. And in multiple transactions, you have the TXID, which Waddle mentioned earlier. So I think that just use a different UTXO for the next one.
Cool. Thanks.
Dom's got a hand up, and I saw Mix had a hand up for a second.
Hey, probably not adding much value. And I missed a bit. When you this is probably not really a point, but you're saying minting policy validator. Is validator ever used alongside minting policy? You say minting policy script and validator script, or do you mean a minting policy that also invokes a validator?
Yeah. One of the things we show in the course here, and this is an example of what I mean. I'm talking about using make policy, which is really just a special sort of make validator that doesn't have the full data redeemer end context. It just has redeemer end context.
So just on the purely terminology thing,
yeah,
I think I would refer to that as a minting policy script. So as a minting policy and validator are distinct, but both of them are scripts.
Okay,
in the terminology.
That's fair.
And on the point about the Plutus scripts making NFTs, it's not just that you're spending UTXO, it's that the logic of the Plutus script, like it embedded in it, is a like almost hard coding of that ID. Because obviously you spend UTXOs in any transaction.
Yeah.
It's the fact that you're spending a UTXO and that UTXO is hard coded into the minting policy, so it can never be replayed, so to speak.
Okay, so we're using a Plutus function that says you must use this TX hash, this UTXO to mint this, and obviously, right, once that's been spent, it can't be again. That's good. Mix, what you got?
Hey, James, how are you? I just wanted to point out about this NFT that's an ongoing discussion for several weeks. In Lara's video, as I think Valgi mentioned, the UTXO is being used to produce a unique policy ID. So each NFT has the same name. If you remember, it has ABC, but different policy ID. Whereas in, for example, in Gimbal Lab, we have same policy ID, but different name, different asset name for each person for Plutus Project-Based Learning for summer 2022. So the idea is through NFT. And one thing that is specified in that video and that script or Plutus script is true NFT. Not only you have to mint it once, but you should not, or you must not be able to replace it. That's the whole idea, non-fungible. And not only replace it with another NFT or something, but if you remember in that video, there is an idea of burning, which we do with negative value. So we can burn a token, but you should not be able to burn an NFT, a true NFT. So when you are locking a script with time lock, with giving a time, you are not only able to mint, but you are not able to even burn it too. So, but the current NFT we are seeing in Cardano space, they are not NFT at all. They are actually token. Not only they can mint anything they want, as the NFT you have, they can mint it, but they can take what you have too. They can burn it. So, which is not okay. Imagine we had a discussion about royalty. So the 2.5% or let's say 10% royalty for NFT and in a secondary market. And let's say the community gather and start a new market that say we don't care about the royalty and I don't know, let's call it black market or something. And imagine you are say, oh, 10% is too much. So I want to put my NFT in that market that doesn't give 10%. When the project manager or the person who minted that, if they don't have a locked or policy locked or this locked script, they can say, oh, you are hurting our business. You are not giving 10%. Therefore, we will get your NFT from you. We will burn it. So they can blacklist some smart contract, and if NFT goes to that smart contract, they query that blockchain, and then automatically that NFT will not be. They don't exist anymore. So, but that's not an NFT. The NFT, the philosophy and the technology say you should not be able to replace it. And replace it with nothingness or emptiness is again another replace. So the time is what protect a user, consumer, and it can make a user to be sure that this is unique and it will stay unique. Thanks.
That's really good. And that distinction there, like somebody can't burn an NFT that's already in my wallet. They would have to have my signing keys as well if they wanted to burn something that I already hold.
They get disqualified, I think, James.
Exactly. They could put me on a revocation list anytime. Yeah. And anybody who doesn't know the term revocation list, don't worry, like 10 years from now, everybody's going to know that term as we move into the era of SSID, self-sovereign identity. Revocation lists are going to be on the front line of access, right? So this is what Mix is talking about here. You gave me a token, and this token is supposed to give me access to X or Y or Z, but you put me on a list of such tokens that are no longer valid, and who controls those lists is going to be the front line of major, battles for years to come. But we'll do more with SSID, whether it's within these next 7 weeks or beyond this course. Everything about a credential token, hopefully, will point you in the direction of much bigger questions about decentralized identity. And so this course, we're surveying as much as we can in a relatively short amount of time. But hopefully some people in this room right now, these questions of identity are really going to capture your imagination, because we need a lot of smart people working on some of those questions. To wrap up, I just want to share with everybody, we updated the course calendar just a little bit yesterday, okay? The planning team got together. Intermission has been on our list to start not this coming Monday, but the Monday after that. So, 2 weeks from now, it'll be intermission week. And our goal during intermission week is to really get feedback from everybody who's taking the course about what you want to learn next. Okay, so 301, which was going to be a little project getting us into using the front end, that's been moved up to here and it's been renamed just a mini project. And what you're going to do in this mini project that goes live on Monday is actually combine all of the concerns that we've introduced so far. Plutus contract, or Plutus script, I should say, front end integration, and like we're talking about today, even a bit of standardized metadata. So you're going to see all three of those pieces working together for a relatively primitive project, but hopefully one that allows you to connect some of these dots. Okay, and you're going to see all three of these tools working in concert. So that'll go live next week. Then we'll spend a week both eliciting feedback from people. What do you really want to prioritize in the rest of the course? And also encouraging collaborations to form. And only after we get that feedback from you will we, know how to emphasize these 300 level modules. A big thing we talked about yesterday was that, we want the content of this course to be responsive to what people here want to learn about. And we don't want to be sitting here making assumptions about what you want to learn about without asking you, okay? So mini project to tie together our BBK, intermission where you can really tell us what you're excited about, and then 5 more weeks where we dive into whatever you're most fired up to learn together. Any questions about those syllabus updates? Now, there's a couple people here who have really moved through all of this content already. So if you feel like there's not enough to do, or if you're just wondering, hey, I'm up to date, I've done everything up through 204, and you want some tips on what to explore next, just reach out anytime, okay? I'm assuming that people here are pretty creative, and you've probably you've identified a couple of rabbit holes for yourself already. But if you need any help with that process of choosing what to prioritize as you start to dig a little deeper, just reach out and I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that. Cool. Well, thanks for being here today. I just want to reiterate.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, Bernard, you're welcome. And hey, just
thank you so much.
One more time. We're building metadata standards together. So I'm gonna replay Dagwell's quote from earlier. Should we be thinking about new metadata standards? You're darn right we should. Okay, so I'm really excited that we had a chance to touch on that today. And sorry, yeah, Bernard and then Sam.
Yes, I wanted to say thank you so much for clarifying this NFT. You mentioned about the credentials. I think you were worried. It sounded to me like you are worried that if you produce these credentials as an NFT with the student's credentials, probably is of what value is that going to be out there in the community? It will carry value. Any training brings skills, and everyone, everywhere. If you have a project or you approach anyone, say, all right, I would really like you to come and work on my project. Send me your resume. And one of it is I attended Plutus Pioneer, and with Plutus Pioneer program, there is an NFT there with all our photos there. And then I also attended this Kimber Labs 10-week Plutus project-based. They will need some sort of a reference, and they can't call you.
Yes, they will.
So that credential.
This is it. That's exactly, well, so
Yes.
this, and the only way to do the development work that needs to be done is to expose more people to these problems, right? So you already get it. Yeah. All right. Okay. Bernard's going to get a credential token for a PPBL after he finishes the course. Great. But then what's stopping him from selling it to somebody else? And how do we know who that person that now holds the token is the person who they say they are, who actually has these skills they're supposed to have? We don't. And these are the problems that are at the vanguard of self-sovereign identity development, right? If you ever hear about Atala Prism rolling out, right? These are the questions. In the Ethereum community, people talk about proof of soul, okay? So these are the cutting edge questions, but my opinion is that we make progress on these kinds of questions when we force the issue, right? Hey, let's put credential tokens out there and let's let them be exploited. And then let's notice the problems together. And then let's develop accordingly, right? We can do it in this safe place, but we need a group of people coming to a shared understanding of these development problems so that we can actually make some progress together. So yeah, Bernard, you're like 3 weeks. I love it.
James.
Yep.
I know this public blockchain is an issue, but if we are to face it, if I do any training wherever I do training, and then if I submit my profile photo, and then with some other details, so that it's not possible for anyone to sell it. If I sell it to anyone, it's useless. Because if you look at my LinkedIn photo, you look at my photo here, you look at my photo, because here, that is why an ID has got a profile photo. Could have taken that photo when you were here. But when they look at your ID, they can verify that this is the same person. Something like that. Could add a photo there.
We start there, right? We start there, but the moment we start thinking about, okay, how might photos be used? Still, what if it's a virtual relationship, right? So I think you're on the right track. That it might be that simple, but then we have to think about what you're proposing and think about the potential pitfalls of that together, right? And so I just want to point out to everybody at the end of module 203, there's a discussion. What's your definition of credential? Thanks, Roberto and Dominic, for already jumping in, but I encourage everybody, put your own answers to this question here. We're not going to invent a standard out of thin air. The only way we can create a reliable standard together is to start by talking about it, right? So what's important to you? What do you agree with and disagree with from what other people are starting to post as answers to these questions? And only after we each take a chance to kind of think through these questions for ourselves, and then, let's figure out where we agree and disagree. And then we can gradually start moving towards an initial version of whatever this standard is that we might be building together. So that's 2035 right here. Somebody else's hand was, yeah, Sam.
Yeah, well, so I had two questions. That just gave me a new one of, so yeah, you could sell your credential token, but since James, you own the policy ID, could you then blacklist that one if you see that it got like transferred to a different wallet?
I could, and then the next question is, okay, should I have that much power? Right? Okay,
Right,
who should have that power? How can we trust anybody to not start exploiting that power once they have it, right? So these are, every one of these ideas then leads us hopefully to the next question. And by jumping in again, this is just another example of, by asking that question, Sam, you move us one step deeper into what we really need to understand together.
And
Right,
my question to that question has always kind of been, well, what if it's the same person and they're just moving it from one wallet to another wallet? Maybe it's a hardware wallet and they wanted to be more secure. Then does that mean they should be blacklisted from the platform? Or, you know, how do you actually validate, like James said, proof of soul?
And that goes back, this is Nicholas was just asking that question, right? He said metadata for the NFT could have the address it was rewarded to, but then Curtis's point immediately comes up if we start thinking about that solution.
Or yeah, and in that case, you could maybe end up, I think people might end up having wallets just to hold credentials that, you know, a wallet where you know it won't move around, kind of. You won't be moving the credential NFT.
Something like a digital identity. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, digital identity. Yeah, exactly. But my other question was, I know we're out of time today, but maybe for next time, because this is such a huge concept of, I think every game or application wants evolving NFTs. Maybe next time we can go into the CIP 68 and what they're proposing there.
That's a good idea. Yeah. Yeah.
But Mike, a quick question. Normally, a credential, anything someone's issue as a credential, should have an authority over that credential, because that's the whole point of that. You know, someone wants to give a partial authority or proof of authorization to someone else. So if that someone else wants to use it to somewhere else or abuse it, has to inform that authority to change it to whatever. I mean, in a real world, where do we use a credential as an ID or whatever, an issue for buying something, to sell something? So someone gives us authority, but all of this has to have a origin authority. So I don't know, James, if you are saying, if you should not have that power, then who? A community is something's not, you know, you cannot specify someone, because if something happens, a problem happens, you are coming to where? A community, right. If you want to reissue that, if you have some issue with problem with that credential. So I don't really understand when we say someone shouldn't have the authority over that credential, because that's the whole point and the basic philosophy of credential.
I'm speaking in broad strokes, and right, I think it's worth it to kind of name at a high level, okay, maybe we shouldn't trust individuals with everything, and then that gets us into better conversations about multi-sig. But then that gets us into better conversations about, well, what's the proper use of multi-sig? How many do you need? How many X out of how many Y on any given change that might be made? Should it even be public and private key pairs at all? Or could we have some token that represents that authority? These are hopefully all the next questions that come up for people as they think about this. Unfortunately, I got to jump off for today. But guys, thank you everybody for jumping in. And I can tell that the fun is just starting around here. If we're having these kind of conversations only 4 weeks in, I'm really proud of us and excited for where we're going to be a few more weeks from now. Thanks for this, y'all. See you soon.
Yeah,
Thank you, James.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
You too.
Take care.